Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional with a deep understanding of finance and finance education from Vancouver, Canada, Mr. Tim Vipond. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ash. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Tim is a finance leader and an education innovator. He's the co-founder and CEO of Corporate Finance Institute. So, Tim, my first question for you, what specific gap in finance education did you see that
hmm
made you believe CFI had to exist?
Yeah, great question. When we started the company 10 years ago, the clear gap that we observed was moving from theoretical, like university classroom learning, to practical on-the-job skills.
Hmm.
And that skill gap was really only filled by employers. You had to get the job first to get the training, and we wanted to bring that to people anywhere in the world, and quickly fill that gap for them.
Hmm. And in the earlier days, what was harder, building the content or building trust? And at what time did you realize this was no longer a side project, but a scalable global platform?
Yeah, great question. I would add a third part to it, and I'll talk
Uh-huh.
about the content,
Mm.
trust, and then distribution.
Right.
So in the early days of the business, I spent almost equal parts on those three areas, let's call it, creating content. Creating the content, in part came from my co-founding partners who were actually running a classroom training company that did global bank training.
Hmm.
They were called MDA Training out of London, and they had a lot of materials there. It's a part of it. The other part came from me, from my own personal experience working in investment banking as an analyst, moving up, working in corporate development,
Hmm.
FP&A, in a bunch of areas. So together with their material plus my work experience, we got the content built. And of course, that took a lot of time.
Hmm.
Second part, building trust. That really comes from learner reviews and feedback.
Yeah.
Learners taking our courses, telling us, hey, this really helped me in my job. And then when we noticed people sharing it on LinkedIn, like they would complete a course or a program, they'd go on LinkedIn and they'd share their certificate publicly. That's
Hmm.
when we knew we had trust, when we
Wow.
saw those certificates getting shared.
Hmm.
And then the final piece on distribution, we were a bootstrapped business. So
Hmm.
really the only way for me to have an audience 10 years ago was a little different than now. But SEO was a great way to do it back then, or content marketing. So we spent a lot of time creating free content,
Hmm.
putting it on our website, and getting visitors through search engines. So
Hmm.
yeah, those three things kept me extremely busy for a long time, you could say.
Amazing. And tell me what makes education at CFI more practical and less, or rather than academic?
hmm Well, I would say the main reason is that the way it's more practical, I should say, is because we use tools that you use on the job to
Hmm.
complete. You could think of them like assignments.
Hmm.
So we'll give you a set of financial statements for a business, but then we'll go into Excel, show you in Excel how you would put all those financial statements, link them up together, build a forecast, calculate ratios, build charts and graphs, make a presentation, that practical side. And so we'll show you first through demonstration, and then we'll have you complete the exercises on your own and answer questions and
Hmm.
pass a test. So
Hmm.
it's that real world application that we focus on.
Hmm. Very interesting. How
Yeah.
do you ensure that what you teach mirrors real capital markets?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something we're always working on, quite frankly, because as capital markets change and careers change, we have to stay on top. But in the early days, having worked in those roles myself, I,
Hmm.
I drew on my own work experience in investment banking, corporate development, et cetera. And I felt quite confident that I knew what was required at the time. As time's moved on, though, we've hired other instructors, and we now have a whole incredible team of 20 plus instructors around the world that are
Hmm.
teaching these courses that have different work experience. Another thing that we do is we constantly look at job descriptions for job postings. So we'll scrape financial analyst job postings, make sure that what we're teaching still maps to
Yeah.
those skills.
Mm.
And then the third piece is it happens, I guess, at scale more so that luckily we have now where we have large large corporate customers. Those corporate customers, whether they're banks or operating companies, are using our platform and will help us, like give us feedback about, hey, we really want to make sure our people have learned this
Mm.
or that. Like you're seeing it with AI now. We're getting a
Yeah.
lot of requests for AI training, and so we're making a big push to bring AI training into our courses.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you have observed that traditional finance programs tend to make?
Hmm. Well, I don't want to be too critical, but here's one thing that really stands out for me. There are some certifications out there that are purely memorization based.
Correct.
And when you're reading a textbook, trying to commit stuff to memory and then answer a multiple choice test, I don't think that's really assessing whether or not you can do the job. So anything that's purely memorization based, I have a bit of an issue with.
Hmm.
Um, and if it's too theoretical, again, it's just not going to be useful right
Yeah.
away in your job.
Mm.
So those are my two issues. Now, but I want to say I do think there is a place for theoretical education.
Mm.
I wouldn't advocate for getting rid of it entirely. In fact, I
Yeah.
think like early on in undergrad, and that's good. So yeah, so those are my two
Very
main
interesting.
things.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. When I was reading about you and preparing for my conversation, I was also fascinated that you receive a lot of student emails. What have
Mm.
you learned directly from student emails that no analytics dashboard could possibly reveal that has helped you to design such amazing programs?
Mm. What have I learned from student emails that I couldn't uh, otherwise? That's your question, right?
Yeah.
I think it's the parts of the training that don't come naturally to them that maybe I have taken for granted that I know how to do. And someone, and if we see a theme, like a lot of
Mm.
people are having trouble making a certain uh, type of analysis work for them, then we have to go back and look at that and look at our explanation and make sure we're explaining it as clearly as possible. Maybe try it a different way, give a different example, a different demonstration,
Mm.
and make sure that it's clicking for them. That would be one major theme of feedback that we get that we have to
Mm.
work through. Yeah.
Mm. I was also fascinated to read that you still write content and answer learner emails. Why is this non-negotiable for you?
Yeah, and luckily I don't do it at scale, but I certainly do it still. And the reason it's important is because I need to stay connected to the
Correct.
customer. And there's sort of a craft or an art, if you
Mm.
will, of being in education, making courses and delivering, the training and educational materials. So
Mm.
for me, I want to always be in the craft, whether it's writing an article, creating a course, delivering lecture videos. I was recently in the Middle East visiting customers of ours and actually delivered a live workshop for them.
Mhm.
And it's not something I had to do, but I wanted to because I wanted to be up there as an instructor delivering a lesson. It just keeps me on top of my craft, so to speak.
Very interesting. What metrics do you track that truly reflect learning outcomes and not just engagement?
Mm. Well, we do survey our users. And so
Hmm.
when we are our learners, I should say, so when we survey them, we ask them if they've received a promotion, if they've received a raise, or if they've received recognition that, in their opinion, is a result of the training that they've taken with us.
Hmm.
And overwhelmingly, we get the response that yes, it has led to raise, promotion, or recognition.
Hmm.
So we view that as a very strong signal from people. And at the end of the day, that's really what matters most in our business is that people
Hmm.
are getting outcomes. That's what they go to us for, to
Hmm.
get a career outcome. And so we have to deliver on that.
Hmm. Hmm. You've also developed the FMVA certification.
Mhm.
Tell me about this. What was it designed to solve, and how do you ensure it
Mm.
remains relevant?
Yeah, the FMVA is one of the most exciting parts of the journey that we've been on, one of the
Mm-hmm.
things I'm the most proud of, quite frankly. So
Mm-hmm.
we start a little bit of context and then I'll get into it. But we started the business with just a collection of courses.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our competitors that were offering online training also a collection of courses. And eventually we realized as the collection got bigger, hey, there needs to be a pathway here. There needs to be a coherent curriculum and we need to move people through something. And if we're going to do that, it should really be a certification program. So that's sort of how the idea was born. The library got so big. And then we looked out at the existing certification programs and thought, what would we want to change or fix?
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned earlier, a few things I really wanted to fix what were one thing was I didn't want it to be just memorization based. I wanted it to be practical.
Mm-hmm.
Two is I wanted it to be able to be completed completely online, which now is, not as differentiated, but 10 years ago that was more so.
Mm-hmm.
To be extremely affordable, so a few $100s, not thousands of dollars. And I also wanted it to be completable in a reasonable amount of time, like less than a year, whereas some other programs will take several years, of failed exams and piles of textbooks. And so
Right.
that was like the thing we were trying to solve for.
Mm-hmm. Well
Yeah.
said. What were some of your pivotal inflection points as you were growing, and how did you scale culture when you were
Mm.
started to expand beyond the shores of North America?
Hmm. Yeah, great question. So, I mean, the inflection points came when we had to maintain. One thing was as the library of courses and certification programs got bigger, maintaining those
Mm,
becomes a serious operation. So
yeah.
making sure that we have a learning and development team that has the right subject matter experts, the right designers, and the right group of people to keep
Mm,
all those courses up to date, high quality, and so on.
yeah.
That became a real operation. Getting the distribution to continue growing again was the other operation essentially that expanded beyond search engine optimization and into YouTube and social media and various channels
Hmm.
to build the reach of our business, if you will. So that was also a big focus. And then in terms of culture, well, up until about 50 employees, I would say it's pretty easy to be like on a first name basis with everybody and talking to everybody, either some way or another, either directly or in a small group. And so you can
Mm,
really have a good handle on the culture.
mm,
But once you start getting much past 50 employees, which we've done, it becomes harder and you have to delegate. I had to learn how to delegate a lot more, how to hire people that could be managers that I trusted and that aligned well with our
mm,
mission, with our
mm,
company, and so on.
mm.
And frankly, it's something I'm still working on. I think that's something you have to always continue working on is building culture and
Mm.
making sure that the culture stays where you need
Yeah,
it to stay.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
um,
absolutely. And it's a great response because the culture has always been a challenge when you start looking at education across boundaries of countries. Thank
mm.
you. Um, my next question, and you partly answered it, that you support the need for traditional financial education, but in the long term, do you see professional certifications replacing traditional finance education?
I think there'll always be a place for, let's call it a very elite or luxury type of product. And
Hmm.
that's where I view some universities staying is they're
Hmm.
this luxury good, very expensive, 4 years and a great place to go.
Hmm.
And then for many other universities, there may not be that ROI
Hmm.
where you're not getting a name brand recognition out of it. And you might be better off actually just taking a professional certification program such as the FMVA and going out and starting to work earlier or with
Hmm.
less debt. I really
Hmm.
think that, going out into the workforce with a huge amount of debt and not getting name brand recognition that's sort of getting you that elite job, that's where I think there's going to be a real shift.
Hmm.
It's probably already started to happen. It's
Hmm.
probably happened in software engineering and other, areas, and it's probably going to start to happen in finance
Hmm.
too at some point. So
Hmm.
it'll be interesting to see how it actually plays out. But that would be my theory that we would serve a huge, probably like the big middle of the market, you might
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
And well, of course, there'll be still this luxury university experience available for those who want it.
Hmm. Very interesting. The other aspect that I was amazed about was that how are you competing with so much free content that's available
Mhm.
online? And especially in the world of finance, there seems to be just an incredible amount of content. How do you
Mhm.
compete?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, we have to think carefully about that. There's a few ways I'll answer it. One is to get a lot out of free content, you
Hmm.
have to know what you don't know. And a lot of times people just don't even know what they don't know.
Hmm.
So trying to cobble together a bunch of free content into like a coherent curriculum that's going to
Yeah.
make you job ready is actually quite hard to do. But if you know there's something you need to learn, like you know, I just need to learn how to calculate weighted average cost of capital. Okay, sure.
Hmm.
You can go on YouTube and get a great video or go on AI and have a great chat experience.
Hmm.
Yeah, you know, and people should do that. But if you want to learn end to end the full spectrum of skills that you need in a job that we know employers are asking for, that we, you know, that's the whole purpose to get you
Hmm.
desk ready in the most efficient way possible.
Hmm.
And considering our product is remarkably just a few $100s per year,
Hmm.
you know, I think the value prop is extremely strong, even against free stuff, because your
Hmm.
time is valuable. And
Yeah.
if you go on YouTube and try to string it together yourself, you might get some decent stuff, and you'll get some of our stuff even, but you won't
Hmm.
get the full curriculum that gets you all the way there, gets you hired, gets you promoted, which is
Hmm.
actually worth a lot. So yeah, there'll always be this dynamic though of free stuff versus what are you willing to pay
Correct.
for.
Correct.
And in our case, I think this type of education is worth paying for.
Hmm.
But we'll have our work cut out for us with AI offering more and more for free.
Hmm.
And we'll have to continue making sure we're delivering the value that
Hmm.
people need
Hmm. Well
or
said.
people want.
There's another aspect of finance which I've seen all over the world, and that is that when it comes to finance, there's a lot of regulatory inputs that are needed. And
Hmm.
these regulatory inputs vary from country to country.
Yes.
How do you tackle the incredible diversity of uh, legalese that goes into building
Yes.
a finance portfolio in different
Yes.
countries?
Well, that's a great question. And you know, the fascinating thing about it, and it's a strategic trade-off we've always had to deal with, is that we don't cater to any particular country's
Hmm.
legal tax or accounting regimes. So what I mean is there's this core skill set of financial analysis that's universal.
Hmm.
That's reading an income statement, a balance sheet, a cash flow statement, the ratios, the mod, okay, all
Yeah.
this stuff that's always, and that's what we focus on. And then we actually are willing to, you know, refer you to someone else essentially if you want to learn um, IFRS
Hmm.
nitty gritty, like then you know that's not what we're going to teach you actually.
Okay.
Or if you want to learn like you know the tax code in Indonesia, like we're not going to get into what that is, and
Yeah.
not even in the U.S. with U.S. GAAP or
Hmm.
U.S. tax. So
Hmm.
we you know, but it's an opportunity that we had to forgo. But what it means is we get to focus on just being the best at the core skills that we want to
Hmm.
teach to people.
Hmm. So, time for two more questions for you, Tim.
Sure.
Um, when you're not talking about all the legal perspectives, etc., in different countries, a lot of work that goes into teaching the young people from CFI are financial modeling, for example.
Hmm.
What does great financial modeling truly signal about a professional?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say the number one thing is clarity of thought
Hmm.
and insight
Hmm.
on the business.
Hmm.
Because what a financial model really is at the end of the day, assuming the calculations are correct, but that's just sort of like the table stakes mechanical part of it. The value add part of it is that You identified the most critical assumptions, and usually for most businesses, only a few. So you've narrowed in on those few assumptions that matter, and you really understand the story of how those assumptions are going to drive some output.
Hmm.
They're going to, drive like the growth of the business, or that the company is undervalued or overvalued, or that it needs to pivot, or whatever it's going to do. The financial model, you've sort of uncovered it with this financial model. You've got total clarity about the business. And then there's multiple use cases for that. If you're within a company, it would be helping the executives of that business make decisions of, like, where they should take their product, or geographies. What those big decisions. Or if you're outside of the company, it's like, should we invest in this company, or should it make an acquisition, or so, the outside advisor type lens on the
Hmm.
business.
Hmm.
But either way, it's the same thing, identifying these key assumptions, and figuring out how the business is going to be impacted by them.
Well said. And my last question for you, and this is for the many, many, many people who will listen to our conversation. A lot of them are finance professionals. What skills do you think young finance professionals most underestimate?
Hmm. I think, well, I hope I can say more than one. Accounting is actually one.
Yeah.
Okay. I was surprised because I went straight into finance,
Hmm.
and I totally missed how much accounting based
Correct.
knowledge I needed to be
Yeah.
good at finance, to
Yeah.
know those statements inside out and know the account. Okay. So that's one. And then later on, I would say in the career, the biggest thing is the soft skills and this sort of storytelling, business partnering,
Yeah.
right? And being that articulate and insightful provider of information. So it's kind of on two ends of the career spectrum, I would say, between accounting or that like business partnering angle to it.
Mm. And that's a great response because I know my own journey. I finished an MBA in finance, went into a finance role, and I realized accounting was an area that I had to learn. And then as
Yeah.
I went into general management, I had to learn a totally different set of skills. But Tim, thank you so much for speaking to me. This has been such a fascinating conversation on the need for understanding, learning financial skills, no matter whether you're young, whether you're older, but to succeed at work, it's critical to have finance skills. Thank you for explaining everything that you do at CFI and for taking so many of my questions and answering them so well. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck to you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.